Marcus Chen adjusted the medical
You are
scanner in his
sworn.
hands,
You
watching
are
the
summoned to
alien
the
readings
royal
flicker
court
across its blue-tinted
immediately.
display. The device hummed softly as it processed the complex biology of his patient, a frail Zephyrian woman whose breathing came in shallow, painful gasps. Her daughter, Princess Lyra, knelt beside the makeshift medical bed they had constructed in the refugee camp, her luminescent skin dim with worry. "The toxin has spread throughout her respiratory system," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of bad news. "Without proper treatment, she has maybe 6 hours." Princess Lyra's large, opalescent eyes filled with tears that sparkled like liquid starlight. "There must be something you can do, Dr. Chen. You humans are known for your resourcefulness." Marcus had heard that tone before. Hope mixed with desperation, the last plea of someone watching their loved one slip away. He had been serving as a field medic for the Galactic Relief Corps for 3 years now, ever since the Hegemony War had begun tearing apart the Outer Rim systems. In that time, he had seen more death and suffering than any human should witness in 10 lifetimes. But he had also learned something important about his species that the galaxy was only beginning to understand. Humans did not give up. Not ever. "Tell me about the toxin," Marcus said, already moving toward his equipment cases. "What exactly happened?" Lyra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving trails of bioluminescent tears on her pale blue skin. "Hegemony forces attacked our medical transport 3 days ago. They used some kind of chemical weapon. Most of the survivors have similar symptoms, but, Mother, she was closer to the initial blast." Marcus nodded grimly. The Hegemony had been using increasingly brutal tactics as the war dragged on. Chemical weapons were supposedly banned by the Geneva Andromeda Accords, but the insectoid species that made up the Hegemony's leadership had never been particularly concerned with galactic law. "Has anyone tried standard detox protocols?" Marcus asked, pulling out a portable chemistry lab that looked like it belonged in a much larger facility. "The Altrurian doctors tried everything they knew," Lyra said. "They said the toxin is unlike anything in their databases. It seems specifically designed to target Zephyrian physiology." Marcus paused in his setup. That was troubling news. Targeted biological weapons were the stuff of nightmares, especially when dealing with a species as diverse as those that made up the Galactic Alliance. If the Hegemony had developed toxins specific to individual species, the implications were staggering. "I need to run some tests," Marcus said. "Can you get me a sample of your mother's blood? Also, I'll need access to any medical records you might have." As Lyra hurried to comply, Marcus began setting up his equipment. The chemistry lab was a marvel of human engineering, capable of breaking down molecular structures and identifying compounds with precision that rivaled much larger installations. It was also completely improvised, built from salvaged parts and held together with determination and medical tape. The other refugees in the camp watched him work with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Most had never seen a human up close before the war began. Humanity was still the newest member of the Galactic Alliance, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. To many of the older species, humans were still primitive newcomers who had stumbled onto the galactic stage by accident. Marcus had heard all the whispers and jokes. Humans were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too emotional. They lacked the logical approach of the Vultanians or the mystical wisdom of the Etherians. What could a species that had barely left its own solar system possibly contribute to a war between civilizations that had been traveling the stars for millennia? But Marcus had also seen what happened when humans got involved in problems that seemed impossible to solve. There was something about human nature that refused to accept defeat, even when all logic suggested surrender was the only option. The blood sample arrived, and Marcus immediately began his analysis. The toxin was indeed unlike anything he had seen before. It was not just one compound, but a complex cocktail of chemicals that seemed to adapt and evolve even as he watched. Each time his scanners identified a component, it would shift slightly, as if it were alive. "Adaptive nanotoxin," Marcus muttered to himself. Clever bastards. The toxin was designed to counter any treatment attempts by literally rewriting itself at the molecular level. It was the kind of weapon that could only be created by a species with centuries of experience in chemical warfare. No wonder the Altrurian doctors had failed. Their standard medical protocols were completely useless against something that evolved faster than they could adapt their treatments. But Marcus was not thinking like an Eltrurian doctor. He was thinking like a human. "Princess Lyra," he called out. "I need you to tell me everything you can about your mother's medical history. Every illness, every treatment, every genetic marker you know about." "Why?" Lyra asked, confusion clear in her voice. "Because I am not going to try to kill this toxin," Marcus said, his eyes still focused on the readouts. "I am going to trick it." For the next 2 hours, Marcus worked with an intensity that bordered on manic. He synthesized compounds, ran simulations, and discarded dozens of potential treatments. The other medics in the camp began to gather around his workstation, watching with growing amazement as he pushed his equipment far beyond its designed limits. "What is he doing?" Marcus heard one of the Eltrurian doctors whisper. "Something impossible," came the reply. Marcus smiled grimly. Impossible was just another word for not yet accomplished in human vocabulary. The breakthrough came when he stopped thinking about the toxin as a chemical and started thinking about it as a form of life. The nanotoxin was not just adapting to treatments, it was learning from them. Each failed attempt to neutralize it provided new information that made it stronger and more resistant. But learning was a two-way street. "Princess, I need you to authorize an experimental treatment," Marcus said, finally, looking up from his equipment. "What I am about to attempt has never been tried before, and there is a significant chance it could make things worse." Lyra looked at her mother, whose breathing had become even more labored in the past hour. "What kind of chance?" "I cannot give you exact odds," Marcus admitted. "But, without treatment, your mother will not survive the night. This gives her a fighting chance." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, and, when she opened them, Marcus could see the steel that marked her as true royalty. "Do it." Marcus nodded and began preparing his treatment. Instead of trying to destroy the nanotoxin, he was going to give it exactly what it wanted: information. But the information would be carefully crafted to send the adaptive system into a feedback loop that would cause it to destroy itself. He synthesized a compound that would mimic the toxin's own adaptation mechanisms, but with a crucial difference. Where the nanotoxin learned to resist treatments, Marcus's compound would learn to be more vulnerable to them. When the two systems encountered each other, they would begin trying to adapt to each other in an endless cycle that would eventually cause both to break down. It was elegant, dangerous, and completely insane. In other words, it was perfectly human. "Beginning treatment now," Marcus announced, loading the compound into an injection system. The gathered crowd of refugees and medical personnel watched in complete silence as Marcus administered the treatment. For several minutes, nothing seemed to happen. The patient's condition remained unchanged, her breathing still shallow and irregular. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. "Her oxygen saturation is improving," one of the Eltrurian doctors said in amazement. "Respiratory function normalizing," added another. Within an hour, the Zephyrian woman's eyes fluttered open for the first time in days. Her breathing had returned to normal, and the bioluminescent patterns that marked healthy Zephyrian physiology began to glow softly beneath her skin. Princess Lyra collapsed beside her mother's bed, sobbing with relief. Around them, the entire refugee camp erupted in celebration. Word spread quickly through the camp that the human doctor had accomplished the impossible. But Marcus was not celebrating. He was already thinking about the implications of what he had just done. "Dr. Chen," Princess Lyra said, approaching him as the celebration continued around them. "I do not know how to thank you. You saved my mother's life." "I was just doing my job," Marcus replied, though his attention was clearly elsewhere. "No," Lyra said firmly. "What you did was extraordinary. You succeeded where doctors with centuries more experience failed." "How?" Marcus finally looked at her directly. "Because I did not try to fight the toxin on its own terms. I made it fight itself." "I do not understand." Marcus sighed. It was always difficult to explain human thinking to other species. Most galactic medicine focuses on applying superior force or knowledge to overcome a problem. Humans, we tend to look for the weakness that already exists and exploit it. the toxin's greatest strength was its ability to adapt. I turned that strength into its greatest weakness. Princess Lyra stared at him with something approaching awe. You think very differently than other species. Yes, Marcus said simply. We do. But, even as the celebration continued, Marcus could not shake the feeling that something larger was at work here. The nanotoxin was too sophisticated, too perfectly designed. The hegemony forces had not stumbled upon this weapon by accident. Someone had specifically created it to target Zephyrian physiology. And, if they could do it once, they could do it again. Princess, Marcus said quietly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you here by accident? Lyra's expression became guarded. What do you mean? I mean, is your presence in this refugee camp a coincidence, or is there something you are not telling me? For a long moment, Lyra said nothing. Then, finally, she sighed. You are very perceptive, Dr. Chen. No, my presence here is not accidental. Explain. Lyra looked around to make sure they could not be overheard. My mother and I were not on a random medical transport. We were fleeing. 3 weeks ago, the hegemony made a specific demand to my government. They wanted me surrendered to them for reasons they would not specify. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. And, your government's response? They refused, of course. But, the hegemony made it clear that they would take me by force if necessary. So my mother and I attempted to reach Alliance territory, where we hoped to find protection. But, you were intercepted. Yes. And, I believe the attack on our transport was not random. I think they were specifically hunting for me. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this information. If the hegemony was willing to deploy sophisticated biological weapons just to capture one individual, then, Princess Lyra was more important than she was letting on. There is more, is there not? He said finally. Lyra nodded reluctantly. My full title is Princess Lyra Zethnavar, first heir to the crystalline throne of Zephyros Prime. When my grandmother, the Queen, dies, I will inherit control of the largest dilithium mining operations in the galaxy. Marcus whistled softly. Dilithium was the key component in faster-than-light drives. Control of its production meant control of interstellar travel itself. No wonder the hegemony wanted her. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Now I must reach the Alliance capital and request formal protection. But, first, I must ensure my mother's recovery is complete. Marcus nodded. I can keep her stable, but she will need proper medical facilities for full recovery. How far are we from Alliance territory? Too far, Lyra said grimly. Even if we could find transport, it would take weeks to reach safety. And, the hegemony will not stop hunting for us. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, his mind racing through possibilities. Finally, he looked up at Lyra with the kind of expression that had become familiar to humans throughout the galaxy. It was the look of someone who had decided that the impossible was merely inconvenient. Princess, he said, how would you feel about trusting a human plan that sounds completely insane? Lyra studied his face carefully. She had heard stories about human plans. They tended to involve a lot of risk, creative problem solving, and a disturbing tendency to work despite all logic suggesting they should fail. Dr. Chen, she said finally, after what you accomplished today, I am beginning to think that insane human plans might be exactly what this situation requires. Marcus grinned. Good. Because I have an idea that is going to require us to do something that no one in the galaxy has ever attempted before. What is that? We are going to make the hegemony come to us. And, when they do, we are going to give them a lesson in human hospitality that they will never forget. As Marcus began outlining his plan, word was already spreading through hegemony communication networks. A human medic had successfully treated a nanotoxin that was supposed to be incurable. The implications were staggering and demanded immediate investigation. High Admiral ZX Thak of the Hegemony Third Fleet received the report while his ship was still 3 days away from the refugee camp. His compound eyes glittered with interest as he read the details. A human, he clicked to his subordinate. How unexpected. "Shall we modify our approach, Admiral?" the subordinate asked. ZXTAC considered this. His original orders were simple: capture Princess Lyra and eliminate any witnesses. But this development presented new opportunities. A human who could counter hegemony biotechnology was potentially more valuable than even the Zephyrian princess. No, he decided finally. We proceed as planned. But, when we arrive, I want this human taken alive. The science cast will be very interested in studying him. And, if he resists? Admiral ZXTAC's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. He is human. Of course he will resist. That is what makes them so fascinating. Back at the refugee camp, Marcus was completely unaware that he had just painted an enormous target on himself. He was too busy working out the details of a plan that would either save Princess Lyra or get them all killed. Possibly both. As night fell over the camp, Marcus made final preparations for what he knew would be the most challenging medical procedure of his career. Not because of its technical complexity, but because success would mean facing an enemy that had just become very, very interested in meeting him personally. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, he had a patient to save and a princess to protect. For a human, that was more than enough reason to do the impossible. Again. 3 days passed in the refugee camp, and Marcus Chen had transformed from a simple field medic into something approaching a local legend. Word of his impossible cure had spread through the camp like wildfire, and, suddenly, every species present wanted to know more about human medicine. Marcus found himself treating everything from Vultanian energy parasites to Etherian soul sickness, conditions that human medical training had never even mentioned. Yet somehow, his unorthodox approaches kept working. Not always, and not perfectly, but often enough that other doctors began requesting consultations on their most difficult cases. "You are making the rest of us look incompetent," Dr. Veltar, the camp's chief medical officer, said with what passed for humor among his crystalline people. "How do you keep succeeding where established protocols fail?" Marcus looked up from his current patient, a young Eltrurian whose biorhythm disorder had resisted treatment for weeks. "I think it is because I do not know what is supposed to be impossible," he said. "When you have been practicing medicine for centuries, you develop assumptions about what can and cannot work. I am too inexperienced to know better." Dr. Veltar's crystalline structure flickered with amusement. Ignorance as a medical tool. How very human. But Marcus was only partially joking. The truth was more complex and, potentially more unsettling. Human medical training was fundamentally different from that of other species because human medicine had developed in isolation. While other galactic civilizations had shared knowledge and standardized treatments for millennia, humans had been forced to develop their own approaches to healing. The result was a medical philosophy that was both primitive and revolutionary. Where other species sought to apply known solutions to familiar problems, humans were trained to treat each patient as a unique puzzle requiring individual solutions. Princess Lyra approached his workstation as he finished treating the Eltrurian patient. Her mother had made remarkable progress over the past 3 days and was now well enough to move around the camp, though she still required regular monitoring. "Dr. Chen," Lyra said quietly, "we need to talk. Privately." Marcus nodded and followed her to a secluded area near the camp's perimeter. The refugee settlement was located in a natural depression surrounded by rocky hills, providing some protection from the harsh winds of this particular moon. But the geography that sheltered them also made them vulnerable to being trapped. "My scouts have detected ships approaching," Lyra said without preamble. 3 hegemony vessels, still 2 days out but definitely heading in our direction." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "How certain are you that they are coming for us?" "Certain enough. Hegemony forces do not travel in this sector unless they have specific targets." Lyra paused. "There is something else. I have been in contact with my government, and they have informed me that the hegemony has made a new demand." "What kind of demand?" "They want you, Dr. Chen. Specifically by name." Marcus stared at her. "Me? How do they even know I exist?" "Word travels fast in wartime," Lyra said grimly. "Your treatment of my mother has not gone unnoticed.
Apparently, the Hegemony Science cast is very interested in studying human medical techniques.
Marcus closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. This was exactly what he had been afraid would happen. By succeeding too publicly, he had drawn attention from forces that were far beyond his ability to handle.
"What are my options?" he asked.
"Limited," Lyra admitted. "The camp has no significant defenses.
If the Hegemony wants to take you, there is little we can do to stop them."
Marcus was quiet for several minutes, his mind racing through possibilities. Finally, he looked up at Lyra with an expression that was becoming familiar to those who knew humans well. It was the look of someone who had just decided to do something spectacularly stupid. "Princess," he said, "I told you 3 days ago that I had a plan.
Are you still willing to trust human judgment?"
Lyra studied his face carefully.
"What exactly are you proposing?" "I am proposing that we stop running and start fighting. But not in the way anyone expects."
"Explain." Marcus gestured toward the camp around them. "Look at this place. We have refugees from dozens of different species, all with unique physiologies and medical needs.
We have doctors and scientists from across the galaxy.
And we have something the Hegemony wants very badly."
"You."
"Me," Marcus confirmed. "So instead of trying to hide from them, we are going to invite them to come and take me."
Lyra's bioluminescent patterns flickered with alarm. "That sounds like suicide."
"Only if we play by their rules," Marcus said.
"But humans do not like playing by other people's rules.
We prefer to change the game entirely." Over the next hour, Marcus outlined his plan to Lyra and the other camp leaders. It was audacious, risky, and completely insane. It was also brilliant in a way that only a human could conceive.
"You want to turn the entire camp into a medical research facility?" Dr. Veltar asked in amazement.
"Not just any research facility," Marcus clarified.
"The most advanced multi-species medical center in the galaxy.
And we are going to do it in 36 hours.
"Impossible," declared Dr. S.H. Lara, the Etherian spiritual healer.
"We lack the equipment, the resources, the infrastructure." "We have something better," Marcus said.
"We have necessity and desperation.
Those are the two most powerful forces in the universe for motivating innovation." The plan was deceptively simple. Instead of trying to hide from the Hegemony forces, they would openly advertise their location and invite them to observe a groundbreaking medical conference. The hook would be the promise of witnessing revolutionary new treatments that could benefit all galactic species. But the real trap was more subtle. You see, Marcus explained to the assembled doctors, the Hegemony Science cast has one critical weakness.
They are scientists first and soldiers second.
If we can convince them that they are about to witness the greatest medical breakthrough in galactic history, their scientific curiosity will override their military objectives.
"And then, what?" Dr. Veltar asked.
Marcus grinned. "Then, we show them exactly what happens when you threaten something a human cares about." The next 36 hours were a whirlwind of activity unlike anything the camp had ever seen. Marcus worked with barely any sleep, coordinating with doctors from every species present to develop a series of medical demonstrations that would be irresistible to any serious researcher. But he was not just preparing medical procedures. He was weaponizing human medicine. Dr. Veltar found him working in the chemistry lab at 3 in the morning, surrounded by compounds that glowed with an unsettling variety of colors.
"Dr. Chen," the crystalline doctor said carefully, "what exactly are you creating?"
"Insurance," Marcus replied without looking up.
"The demonstrations we are planning will be genuine medical breakthroughs.
But they will also serve as delivery systems for something the Hegemony will not expect."
"Which is?"
Marcus finally looked up, and Dr. Veltar was surprised by the hardness in the human's eyes.
"Consequences."
As the Hegemony ships approached, the refugee camp transformed into something that resembled a major medical conference. Makeshift laboratories sprouted throughout the settlement. Demonstration areas were established with equipment salvaged, borrowed, or improvised from available materials. Most importantly, a communications array was set up to broadcast their activities to anyone interested in observing. "This is Dr. Marcus Chen of the Galactic Relief Corps," Marcus announced over an open channel that would be picked up by the approaching hegemony vessels.
"I am pleased to announce the first ever interspecies medical symposium.
Over the next several hours, medical professionals from across the galaxy will demonstrate revolutionary new treatments for conditions that have been considered incurable."
He paused, knowing that the next words would seal their fate one way or another. "We especially welcome attendance by representatives of the Hegemony Science Cast, as several of our demonstrations will focus on the treatment of biological weapons effects." On the bridge of the Hegemony flagship, High Admiral ZX Thack reviewed the transmission with growing interest. His Science Cast advisor, Dr. Kixlon, was practically vibrating with excitement. "Admiral," the scientist clicked rapidly, "this could be exactly what we need. If these treatments are genuine, they could revolutionize our biological warfare capabilities." ZX Thack was more skeptical. "It seems convenient that this symposium is being announced just as we arrive."
"Perhaps," Dr. Kixlon admitted.
"But the potential knowledge to be gained is enormous.
The humans have already demonstrated abilities that we do not understand.
If we can learn their methods." The Admiral considered this.
His original orders were to capture the human and the princess, but gaining access to revolutionary medical techniques would be an even greater victory. And if it was a trap, his forces were more than capable of handling a group of refugees and medical personnel. "Very well," he decided. "We will attend this symposium. But maintain full combat readiness." As the hegemony ships entered orbit around the moon, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and terror. Everything now depended on whether his understanding of hegemony psychology was correct.
"Dr. Chen," Princess Lyra said quietly, "are you certain about this? Once they land, we will be completely at their mercy."
"No," Marcus said firmly.
"Once they land, they will be at ours. They just do not know it yet."
The first hegemony shuttle touched down at the camp's makeshift landing area just as the medical demonstrations were beginning.
Dr. Kixlon emerged with a small escort of soldiers, his compound eyes sweeping the camp with scientific interest.
"Dr. Chen, I presume," the hegemony scientist said in accented Standard Galactic.
"I am Dr. Kixlon of the Science Cast.
Your invitation was most intriguing."
"Welcome," Marcus replied smoothly. "I think you will find today's presentations very educational."
The first demonstration involved Dr. Veltar treating a rare crystalline disease that had been affecting his own people for generations. Using techniques inspired by Marcus's adaptive approach, the crystalline doctor was able to reverse the condition in a matter of minutes.
Dr. Kixlon was fascinated. "How is this possible?"
"Our records indicate that this condition has no cure. Traditional treatment focuses on suppressing symptoms," Dr. Veltar explained. "But, Dr. Chen suggested that we try enhancing the body's natural adaptive mechanisms instead."
The results speak for themselves. The second demonstration was even more impressive.
Dr. S.H. Lara, working with Marcus, successfully treated a form of psychic trauma that had been affecting Etherian refugees. The technique involved a combination of human psychological principles and Etherian spiritual healing that created something entirely new. But it was the third demonstration that captured Dr. Kixlon's complete attention. Marcus stood before a patient suffering from the same nanotoxin that had nearly killed Princess Lyra's mother. But, instead of simply curing the condition, he demonstrated how the treatment could be modified to provide immunity to an entire range of biological weapons.
"Remarkable," Dr. Kixlon breathed.
"You have not just created a cure, but a preventative system.
This could revolutionize defensive medicine."
"This is only the beginning," Marcus said. "We have developed treatments for dozens of conditions previously considered incurable. But our most significant breakthrough involves the treatment of adaptive pathogens."
Dr. Kixlon leaned forward eagerly. "Show me."
Marcus smiled, and, for just a moment, Lyra saw something in his expression that made her shiver. It was not the smile of a healer. It was the smile of a predator.
"Of course," Marcus said. "But this demonstration requires a more controlled environment. Perhaps you would join me in my primary laboratory?"
Dr. Kixlon nodded immediately, his scientific curiosity completely overwhelming any caution he might have possessed.
He followed Marcus into a makeshift laboratory that had been constructed in what used to be a storage building.
Now, Marcus said, sealing the door behind them, let me show you something truly revolutionary. He activated a device that began filling the air with a faint, sweet-smelling mist.
What is that?
Dr. Kixlon asked, suddenly, alert. That, Marcus said calmly, is an aerosolized treatment compound specifically designed for hegemony physiology. In about 30 seconds, you are going to experience something that no member of your species has ever felt before. Dr. Kixlon's compound eyes widened in alarm.
What have you done? I have given you empathy, Marcus said.
For the next several hours, you are going to feel emotions the way other species do. Fear, compassion, guilt, love. All the things that your species considers weaknesses. The hegemony scientist began to back away, but Marcus continued speaking in the same calm, clinical tone. You see, Dr. Kixlon, the greatest weakness of the hegemony is not your technology or your tactics. It is your inability to understand the emotional motivations of your enemies. You see compassion as weakness, cooperation as inefficiency, love as irrationality. But these emotions are not weaknesses. They are the source of our greatest strength. Dr. Kixlon tried to reach for his communication device, but found his movements becoming sluggish. The other doctors, he managed to say. They will know. The other doctors are all volunteers, Marcus said. Dr. Veltar lost his entire family to hegemony raids. Dr. S.H. Lara's homeworld was poisoned by your biological weapons. Every single medical professional in this camp has personal reasons to hate your species. But they are here anyway, treating refugees and saving lives, because that is what healers do. The compound was taking full effect now. Dr. Kixlon collapsed into a chair, his usual clinical detachment replaced by a flood of unfamiliar sensations. I can feel, he whispered in amazement. I can feel their pain. Yes, Marcus said. And now you understand why we fight. Not for territory or resources or ideology. We fight because we care about each other. Because we cannot stand to watch suffering continue when we have the power to stop it. Dr. Kixlon looked up at Marcus with eyes that now held something they had never contained before, understanding. The compound is temporary, Marcus continued. It will wear off in a few hours. But the neural pathways it creates will remain. You will remember what it feels like to care about someone other than yourself. Why? Dr. Kixlon asked. Why show me this instead of simply killing me? Marcus smiled, and this time it was the smile of a healer. Because killing you would not solve the problem. The hegemony will continue to exist whether you live or die. But, if you return to your people with the ability to understand empathy, you might be able to change them from within. And, if I cannot? Marcus's expression hardened. Then, the next time we meet, I will not be so merciful. Outside the laboratory, the rest of the hegemony landing party was experiencing their own revelations. The medical demonstrations had continued, but now they were focused on showing the visitors exactly what their weapons had done to the refugees. Princess Lyra was speaking to a group of hegemony soldiers, showing them children who had been orphaned by their attacks, elderly beings who had lost their homes, families torn apart by war. This is what victory looks like, she said quietly. This is what you are fighting for. Is this really what you want your legacy to be? For the first time in their lives, the hegemony soldiers found themselves questioning orders that had always seemed logical and necessary. When Marcus finally emerged from the laboratory with Dr. Kixlon, the entire dynamic of the camp had changed. The hegemony visitors were no longer conquerors observing potential prisoners. They were individuals confronting the reality of their actions for the first time. Dr. Chen, High Admiral ZX Thak's voice came over the communication system. I believe we need to discuss terms. Marcus looked up at the sky, where he could just make out the hull of the hegemony flagship. I am listening. You have made your point, the Admiral said. We understand that you are not helpless refugees. But neither are you a military force capable of stopping the hegemony war machine. No, Marcus agreed. We are not. Then, what do you propose? Marcus smiled. I propose that we stop fighting over who is strongest and start working together to solve the real problems facing the galaxy.
The hegemony has incredible scientific knowledge. The alliance has diverse perspectives and approaches. Instead of trying to destroy each other, why not try to heal each other? There was a long pause before Admiral ZX responded. And if we refuse? Marcus gestured toward Dr. Kixlan, who was still visibly struggling with his new ability to feel empathy.
Then, you return to your ships, and tomorrow we start broadcasting the formula for emotional enhancement compounds to every species in the galaxy. Within a year, your entire culture will be transformed whether you want it to be or not.
Another pause. You would weaponize emotions?
I would share the gift of understanding, Marcus corrected.
What you do with it is up to you.
The silence stretched for several minutes.
Finally, Admiral ZX spoke again.
I will need to consult with my superiors. Of course, Marcus said. You have 6 hours before we begin broadcasting. Use them wisely. As the hegemony forces withdrew to their ships to deliberate, Princess Lyra approached Marcus with an expression of awe.
You really did it, she said. You found a way to fight them without fighting them.
Marcus nodded, but his expression remained serious.
This is only the first step. The real challenge begins now. What do you mean?
Marcus looked toward the sky, where the hegemony ships hung in orbit like predators deciding whether to strike. Now we have to prove that cooperation really is stronger than conquest. And we have to do it in a way that convinces beings who have spent millennia believing the opposite.
Can it be done?
Marcus considered this question carefully. 6 months ago, he would have said it was impossible. But 6 months ago, he had not yet learned what humans were truly capable of when they refused to accept defeat.
Ask me tomorrow, he said finally.
After we see what the hegemony decides. As night fell over the refugee camp, 2 civilizations hung suspended between war and peace, waiting to see which path the galaxy would choose. And, in a makeshift medical laboratory, a human doctor prepared for the most important patient consultation of his career. He was about to try to heal an entire species. After saving her mother, he faces the princess's queen. Part 3. The message arrived at dawn, transmitted directly to Marcus Chen's personal communication device.
3 words in the clicking, mechanical language of the hegemony, followed by a standard galactic translation: we accept. Come.
Marcus stared at the device for several moments, hardly believing what he was reading. Beside him, Princess Lyra leaned over to look at the screen. They want to negotiate, she asked. Apparently, Marcus said, though something in his tone suggested he was not entirely convinced.
Admiral ZX is requesting a meeting aboard his flagship to discuss terms.
Dr. Veltar approached their workstation, his crystalline structure flickering with concern.
Dr. Chen, surely you are not considering boarding a hegemony vessel.
It could be a trap.
It could be, Marcus agreed.
But it could also be our only chance to prevent a war that will consume the entire galaxy.
Princess Lyra studied his face carefully. You are going to do it anyway, are not you? Marcus nodded.
I have to. If there is even a small chance that we can resolve this peacefully, we have to take it.
Then, I am coming with you, Lyra said firmly.
Absolutely not, Marcus replied immediately.
You are exactly what they want. Taking you aboard their ship would be handing them victory.
And taking yourself aboard their ship would not be?
Lyra countered. Dr. Chen, they want you just as badly as they want me.
Probably more so, after yesterday's demonstration. Marcus was about to argue when another voice interrupted the conversation. If I may, came a clicking, mechanical voice from behind them. Dr. Kixlan approached, moving slowly as if his new emotional awareness was making every step uncertain.
I believe I can provide some insight into Admiral ZX's thinking. The gathered humans and refugees turned to look at the hegemony scientist.
The emotional enhancement compound had worn off during the night, but its effects were still clearly visible in his behavior. Where before he had moved with mechanical precision, now there was hesitation, uncertainty, and something that almost resembled compassion in his compound eyes. The Admiral is genuine in his desire to negotiate, Dr. Kixlan said. But he is also under enormous pressure from the hegemony high command.
They view yesterday's events as a significant threat to their authority. What kind of threat? Marcus asked.
You have demonstrated that hegemony superiority is not absolute, Dr. Kixlan explained. Worse, you have shown that cooperation between species can produce results that individual civilizations cannot achieve alone.
This contradicts the fundamental philosophy that has guided my people for millennia. Marcus nodded grimly. He had suspected as much. So what are we walking into?
A species in crisis, Dr. Kixlan said simply. Half of the high command wants to destroy you immediately before your ideas can spread. The other half wants to capture and study you to learn how you accomplished what you did.
Admiral ZXTHAC represents a third faction that did not exist until yesterday.
Which is?
The faction that wants to change. Princess Lyra frowned. How large is this faction? Microscopic, Dr. Kixlan admitted.
Admiral ZXTHAC, myself, and perhaps a dozen other individuals out of a population numbering in the billions. But sometimes microscopic changes can have enormous effects if they occur in the right place at the right time. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, weighing options and possibilities. Finally, he looked up with the expression that had become familiar to everyone in the camp. It was the look of a human who had decided to attempt the impossible.
Dr. Kixlan, he said, how would you like to help us change the galaxy?
3 hours later, Marcus found himself standing in the shuttle bay of a hegemony warship, surrounded by beings that every instinct told him to fear.
The insectoid soldiers moved with mechanical precision, their compound eyes tracking his every movement.
The ship itself was a marvel of engineering that seemed designed to intimidate as much as to function effectively. But Marcus was not alone. Dr. Kixlan had insisted on accompanying him, and Princess Lyra had simply refused to be left behind.
More importantly, they were carrying something that no hegemony vessel had ever contained before: hope.
Dr. Chen, Admiral ZXTHAC greeted him as they were escorted to the ship's conference chamber.
Thank you for accepting our invitation.
The Admiral was larger than Marcus had expected, his exoskeleton gleaming with what appeared to be both natural chitin and technological enhancements. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded fleets across multiple star systems. But there was something else in his manner that Marcus found encouraging: uncertainty.
Admiral, Marcus replied formally.
I appreciate your willingness to discuss alternatives to continued warfare. The conference chamber was a stark, utilitarian space that reflected hegemony values of efficiency over comfort. But, as they took their seats around a table that seemed designed for beings with very different anatomies, Marcus realized that this awkwardness was symbolic of the larger challenge they faced.
Let me be direct, Admiral ZXTHAC said without preamble. What you accomplished yesterday has created significant problems for my government. The High Command is demanding immediate action to contain what they see as a dangerous ideological threat.
And what do you see it as?
Princess Lyra asked.
The Admiral's mandibles clicked in what Marcus was learning to recognize as a sign of uncertainty among hegemony individuals.
I see it as an opportunity that my people may not be wise enough to recognize.
Explain, Marcus said.
Admiral ZXTHAC gestured to Dr. Kixlan, who had remained silent since boarding the ship. Dr.
Kixlan has reported experiencing something that our species has never known: the ability to understand and share the emotional states of other beings. According to our medical analysis, this ability should have been temporary. But the neural pathways created by your compound appear to be permanent.
That was intentional, Marcus confirmed.
Why?
Marcus leaned forward. Because empathy is not a weakness to be suppressed. It is a tool for understanding.
Your species has achieved incredible technological advancement, but you have never learned to truly understand the motivations of others. This limits your ability to predict behavior, form alliances, or create lasting solutions to complex problems.
Our approach has been successful for millennia, Admiral ZXTHAC pointed out.
Has it?
Princess Lyra interjected.
You are currently engaged in a war that has lasted for decades with no clear path to victory. Your enemies understand you better than you understand them, which is why they continue to resist despite your technological superiority.
Admiral ZX Thak was quiet for several minutes. Dr. Kixlan has made similar observations.
But, implementing the changes you suggest would require a fundamental transformation of our society. The High Command will never accept such radical alterations to our nature.
Then, we change the High Command, Marcus said simply. The Admiral's compound eyes widened. That is treason.
That is evolution, Marcus corrected. Species that cannot adapt to changing circumstances become extinct.
Your current approach is leading toward a war of total extermination.
If you continue on this path, either the hegemony will be destroyed or every other intelligent species in the galaxy will be eliminated.
Neither outcome serves your long-term interests. And, you believe your approach offers a better alternative? Marcus nodded.
I believe cooperation offers possibilities that conquest cannot achieve. But, more importantly, I believe your people are capable of learning this for themselves if given the opportunity.
What do you propose?
This was the moment Marcus had been preparing for since receiving the Admiral's message. Everything now depended on whether he could convince a species that valued logic above all else to take an enormous leap of faith.
I propose a demonstration, Marcus said.
Not of medical techniques or technological capabilities, but of what becomes possible when different species work together toward common goals.
What kind of demonstration? Marcus smiled. How would you like to solve a problem that has plagued the galaxy for centuries and that no single civilization has ever been able to address effectively? Admiral ZX Thak leaned forward with interest. Continue.
The Void Plague, Marcus said.
The silence in the conference room was immediate and complete.
The Void Plague was a mysterious condition that affected spacefaring vessels on long journeys, causing crews to gradually lose the ability to navigate or think clearly. It had been responsible for the loss of thousands of ships from every known civilization. No species had ever found an effective treatment.
The Void Plague is beyond current medical understanding, Admiral ZX Thak said finally. Our best scientists have studied it for generations without success.
Your best scientists have studied it individually, Marcus corrected.
But, what if we brought together medical experts from every species in the galaxy? What if we combined hegemony analytical capabilities with Alliance creative thinking with Etherian spiritual insights?
Dr. Kixlan spoke for the first time since boarding the ship.
The research potential would be unprecedented.
Different species experience the Void Plague differently. By comparing these variations, we might identify patterns that have been invisible to single-species research efforts.
And, if we succeed, Princess Lyra added, we demonstrate that cooperation can achieve what competition cannot. Admiral ZX Thak considered this proposal carefully. The logistics would be enormous.
Coordinating research efforts across multiple species, sharing sensitive medical data, establishing protocols for joint operations.
Difficult, Marcus agreed. But, not impossible.
And, the benefits would extend far beyond solving the Void Plague.
We would be creating the foundation for permanent cooperation between civilizations that have been enemies for generations. The High Command will never approve such an initiative. Marcus grinned. Then, we do not ask for their approval. We present them with results they cannot ignore. You are suggesting that I act without authorization from my superiors?
I am suggesting that you take the same approach that has made humans successful throughout the galaxy, Marcus said. When faced with a problem that seems impossible to solve, we do not ask for permission to attempt the impossible. We simply do it and ask for forgiveness later.
Admiral ZX Thak's mandibles clicked rapidly. That is a very dangerous philosophy.
Yes, Marcus agreed. But, it is also a very effective one. The debate continued for hours, but, gradually Admiral ZX Thak found himself being convinced by the logic of Marcus's proposal. More importantly, he found himself being motivated by something his species rarely experienced, hope. Very well, he said finally. I will authorize a preliminary research mission. But, I must warn you that if this initiative fails, the consequences will be severe for all of us.
And, if it succeeds? Princess Lyra asked. Admiral ZX Thak's compound eyes seemed to glitter with something approaching anticipation. If it succeeds, we may witness the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization.
The next several weeks were a whirlwind of activity unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Research stations were established in neutral space, with representatives from dozens of different species working side by side on the most complex medical mystery in known history. Marcus found himself coordinating efforts between beings whose physiologies were so different that they literally could not breathe the same air. Hegemony scientists worked alongside Alliance researchers, sharing data and insights with a level of cooperation that would have been unthinkable just months before. But the real breakthrough came when Dr. S.H. Lara, the Etherian spiritual healer, made an observation that changed everything. The void plague is not a medical condition, she announced during one of the daily coordination meetings. It is a psychological phenomenon caused by prolonged exposure to the emptiness between stars. Marcus looked up from his data analysis. Explain. Spacefaring vessels are isolated islands of life surrounded by infinite nothingness, Dr. S.H. Lara continued. Over time, this isolation creates a form of existential despair that manifests as the symptoms we have been trying to treat medically. Dr. Kixlan's compound eyes focused intently on the Etherian healer. Are you suggesting that the void plague is essentially cosmic loneliness? In simple terms, yes. Marcus felt something click into place in his mind. That is why the condition affects different species differently. It is not about physiology, it is about how each species experiences isolation and connection. And why no medical treatment has been effective, Dr. Veltar added. We have been trying to cure a spiritual problem with physical remedies. The solution, when it finally emerged, was surprisingly simple. Instead of treating the void plague as a medical condition, they treated it as what it actually was, a consequence of disconnection from others. Space vessels were equipped with advanced communication systems that maintained constant contact with home civilizations. Crews were trained in meditation and community building techniques developed by multiple species. Most importantly, ships began traveling in coordinated groups that provided social interaction even in the depths of space. The results were immediate and dramatic. The incidence of void plague dropped by 90% within months of implementing the new protocols. But the real victory was not medical. It was social. Do you see what we have accomplished? Marcus asked Admiral ZX Thack as they reviewed the final research reports. We have not just solved an ancient problem. We have created a working model for interspecies cooperation. Admiral ZX Thack nodded slowly. His own transformation over the past weeks had been remarkable to watch. The rigid, mechanical thinking that characterized his species had given way to something more flexible and creative. The High Command is impressed, he admitted. Several senior officials have requested briefings on our methods. And your recommendation? That the Hegemony formally request membership in the Galactic Alliance. Princess Lyra, who had been observing the conversation, looked up in amazement. Are you serious? Completely, Admiral ZX Thack replied. We have learned more in these past weeks than in centuries of conquest. If cooperation can produce such results, then perhaps it is time for the Hegemony to evolve. Marcus smiled, but his expression also carried a note of caution. Change will not be easy. Your people have built their entire civilization around the idea of superiority through force. True, the Admiral acknowledged. But they have also built it around the pursuit of knowledge. When presented with clear evidence that cooperation produces superior results, logic demands that we adapt our approach. And if some members of the High Command disagree with this logic? Admiral ZX Thack's mandibles clicked in. What Marcus had learned was the hegemony equivalent of a grim smile. Then, they will find themselves facing something that no hegemony leader has ever encountered before, an opposition that understands them better than they understand themselves. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the new interspecies medical research station, watching as ships from across the galaxy docked at the facility's multiple ports. Hegemony vessels worked alongside Alliance cruisers, their crews collaborating on projects that would have been unthinkable just a year before. Princess Lyra joined him at the viewing window, her bioluminescent patterns bright with contentment. Her mother had made a full recovery and was now serving as an advisor to the new Joint Medical Council. Did you ever imagine it would work this well? She asked. Marcus considered the question carefully.
I hoped it would.
But, hoping and knowing are very different things.
What happens now?
Marcus gestured toward the bustling activity visible through the window. Now we prove that this was not just a lucky accident. We build institutions and relationships that can survive setbacks and disagreements. We create a foundation for cooperation that is stronger than any individual conflict. And if we fail? Marcus looked at her with an expression that had become familiar to beings throughout the galaxy. It was the expression of a human who had decided that failure was simply not an acceptable option.
We do not fail, he said simply. That is not what humans do.
Somewhere in the medical bay of the station, Dr. Kixlon was working alongside a team of researchers from 7 different species, developing new treatments for conditions that had never been attempted before. His transformation from emotionless scientist to empathetic healer had inspired others throughout the hegemony, sparking a revolution in thinking that was spreading across their civilization. And, in a private communication, Admiral ZX Thak was reporting to his superiors that the unthinkable had become reality. The hegemony had found something more powerful than conquest. The human who had started as a simple field medic had become something much more significant. He had become the catalyst for the greatest transformation in galactic history. Not through force or superior technology, but through the most human trait of all, the refusal to accept that impossible simply meant difficult. As Marcus watched ships from former enemy civilizations working together in the name of healing, he realized that this was what humanity brought to the galaxy. Not just medical knowledge or technological innovation, but something far more precious, the unshakable belief that any problem could be solved if enough beings were willing to work together to solve it. It was, he reflected, a very human way to change the universe.
And it was only the beginning.